Hello everyone, I am Frost of Frost VTubing and I welcome you back to yet another video. Today we will be reading along together A Court of Thorns and Roses. I keep calling it Thrones and Roses. I don't know if I'm like mixing up Game of Thrones with it. I am a fan of Game of Thrones. I've heard a lot about this book. I have not read it yet myself. I will be reading a chapter with you guys today and kind of giving my thoughts at the end of the chapter, if I really have any. With that, let's get into it. Oh yeah, it's by Sarah J. Maas. You can see the praises for Josh. I knew you would go under the mountain for me. I love you. It seems like a Lord of the Rings reference. This should be the very first book from what I've seen. Oh, there's 38 chapters. Okay. Nope. There are 46. So this is the map, the fairy realms, the mortal lands. There's some more mortal lands. Highburn? And is that Prythin? Like, almost like Doctor Who. The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. I'd been monitoring the parameters of the thicket for an hour, and my vantage point in the crook of the tree had turned useless. The gust of the wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Hunger had brought me further from home than I usually risked, but winter was a hard time. The animals had pulled in, going deeper into the woods than I could follow, leaving me to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they'd last until spring. They hadn't. I wiped my numb fingers, brushing away the flakes clinging to my lashes. Here, there is no telltale trees. There were no telltale trees stripped of bark to mark the deer's passing. They hadn't yet moved on. They would remain until the bark ran out, and then travel north past the wolves' territory into the fairy lands of Prythian. There were no mortals where no mortals would dare to go, not unless they had a death wish. The shudder skittered down my spine at the thought. I shoved it away, focusing on my surroundings on the task ahead. That was all I could do, all I'd been able to focus. I'll do for years, focus on surviving the week, the day, the hour ahead. And now, with the snow, I'd be lucky enough to spot anything, especially from my position up in the tree, scarcely able to see 15 feet ahead of me. Stifling a groan as my stiff limbs protested at the movement, I unstrung my bow before easing off the tree. Love a good person with a bow. Archery seems so interesting to me. The icy snow crunched under my fraying boots, and I ground my teeth. Low visibility, an unnecessary noise. I was well on my way to yet another fruitless hunt. Only a few hours of daylight remained. If I didn't leave soon, I'd have to navigate my way home in the dark. The warnings of the town hunters still rang fresh in my mind. The giant wolves were on the prowl, and even in numbers. Not to mention the whispers of strange folk spotted in the air, tall, eerie, and deadly. Anything but fairies. The hunters beseeched our long-forgotten gods, and I had secretly prayed alongside them. In the 8 years we'd been living in our village, 2 days' journey from the immortal border of Prythian, we'd been spared an attack, though traveling peddlers sometimes brought a disrupt border towns and left splinters of bones and ashes. These accounts, once rare enough to be dismissed by the village elders as hearsay, had in recent months become commonplace whispering on the everyday market. I risked so much coming so far into the forest, but we'd finished our last loaf of bread yesterday and the remainder of our dried meat the day before. Still, I would have rather spent another night with a hungry belly than found myself satisfying the appetite of a wolf or a fairy. Not that there was much of me to feast on. I turned gangly by this time of the year, and could count a good number of my ribs. Moving as nimbly and quietly as I could between the trees, I brushed my hand against my hollow, aching stomach. I knew the expression that would be on my two elder sisters' faces when I returned to our cottage empty-handed again. I need a sip of water. After a few minutes of careful searching, I crouched in a cluster of snow-heavy brambles. Through the thorns, I had a half-decent view of a clearing and the small brook flowing through it. A few holes in the ice suggested that it was frequently used. Hopefully something would come by. Hopefully. I sighed through my nose. How do you do that? Is it like that? It's more like huffing, isn't it? I mean, I guess... Is it a sigh? It just seems like exhaling. Digging the tip of my bow into the ground and leaning my forehead against the cradle of the curve of the wood. Isn't that how you'd break your bow? Especially in, like, olden days. Is this set in olden days, or is it, like, a post-apocalyptic thing? Also, the map, didn't it look like England and Ireland? We wouldn't last another week without food, and too many families had already started begging me to hope for handouts from the wealthier townsfolk. I'd witnessed firsthand exactly how far their charity went. I eased into a more comfortable position and calmed my breathing, straining to listen to the forest over the wind. The snow fell and fell, dancing and curling like sparkling spindrifts, and white and fresh and clean against the brown and gray of the world. Despite myself, despite my numb limbs, I quieted that relentless, vicious part of my mind to take in the snow-veiled woods. Once it had been second nature to savor the contrast of the new grass and against the dark, tilled soil, or an amethyst brooch nestled in the folds of emerald silk. I once dreamed and breathed and thought in color and light and shape. Sometimes I'd even indulge in envisioning a day where my sisters were married and it was only me and father, with enough food to go around, enough money to buy some paint, and enough time to put those colors and shapes down on paper or canvas or the cottage walls. Not likely anytime soon, perhaps ever. So I was left with moments like this, admiring the glint of pale winter light on snow. That can be blinding. It's very beautiful, but it can be blinding. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done it. I'd bothered to notice anything lovely or interesting. Stolen hours in a decrepit barn with Isaac Hale didn't count. Those times were hungry and empty and sometimes cruel, but never lonely. The howling wind calmed the soft sighing, and the snow fell lazily now in big, fat clumps, gathered along every nook and bump of the trees, mesmerizing the lethal, gentle beauty of the snow. I'd soon have to return to the muddy, frozen roads of the village, to the cramped heat of our college. Some small fragmented part of me recoiled at the thought. Oh, so we like being outside alone. Okay, that's valid. Bushes rustled across the clearing. Drawing my bow was a matter of instinct. I peered through the thorns and my breath caught. Less than 30 paces away stood a small doe, not yet too scrawny from winter, but desperate enough to wrench bark from the tree in the clearing. A deer like that could feed my family for a week or more. My mouth watered. Quiet as the wind hissing through the dead leaves, I took aim. She continued tearing off strips of bark, chewing slowly, utterly unaware that her death awaited yards away. I could dry half the meat, and we could immediately eat the rest. Stews, pies. Her skin could be sold. Her skin could be sold, perhaps turned into clothing for one of us. I needed new boots, but Elaine... It kind of bugs me that Elaine doesn't have an E at the end of it. Needed a new cloak, and Nesta was prone to crave anything someone else possessed. My fingers trembled. So much food, such salvation. I took a steadying breath, double-checking my aim. But there was a pair of golden eyes shining in the bush adjacent to mine. The forest went silent. The wind died, and even the snow paused. We mortals no longer kept gods to worship, but if I'd known their lost names, I would have prayed to them. All of them. Concealed in the thicket, the wolf inched closer, its gaze set on the oblivious doe. He was enormous, the size of a pony. I thought I'd been warned about their presence. My mouth turned... And though I'd been warned about their presence, my mouth turned bone dry. But worse than his size was his unnatural stealth, and even as he inched closer in the bush, he remained unheard, unspotted by the doe. No animal that massive could be so quiet. But if he was no ordinary animal, if he was of Prythean origin, or if he was somehow a fairy, then being eaten was the least of my concerns. If he was a fairy, I should already be running. Yet maybe it would be a favor to the world, to my village, to myself, to kill him while I remained undetected. Putting an arrow through his eye would be no burden. Yet, despite his size, he looked like a wolf, moved like a wolf. Animal, I reassured myself, just an animal. I didn't let myself consider the alternative, not when I needed my head clear, my breathing steady. I had a hunting knife and 3 arrows. The first 2 were ordinary arrows, simple and efficient, likely no more than bee stings to a wolf that size. But the 3rd arrow, the longest and the heaviest one, I brought from a traveling peddler during a summer when we had enough coppers for extra luxuries. An arrow carved from mountain ash, armed with an iron head. From songs sung to us as lullabies over our cradles, we all knew from infancy that fairies hated iron. But it was the ash wood that made their immortal healing magic falter long enough for a human to make a killing blow. Or so legend and rumor claimed. The only proof that we had of the ash's effectiveness was its sheer rarity. I'd seen drawings of the trees, but never saw one with my own eyes. Not after the High Fae burned them long ago. So, was there a war between the Fae and the humans? So few remained, most of them small and sickly, and hidden within the nobility, within well-walled groves. Hidden by the nobility within well-walled groves. I'd spent weeks after my purchase debating whether or not that overpriced bit of wood had been a waste of money or a fake. And for 3 years the ash arrow had sat unused in my quiver. Now I drew it, keeping my movements minimal, efficient, anything to avoid that monstrous wolf looking in my direction. The arrow was long and heavy, enough to inflict damage, possibly kill him if I aimed right. My chest became so tight it ached, and in that moment I realized my life boiled down to one question. Was the wolf alone? I gripped my bow and drew the string further back. I was a decent shot, but I never faced a wolf. I thought it made me lucky, even blessed, but now I didn't know where to hit or how fast they moved. I couldn't afford to miss, not when I only had one ash arrow. And if it was indeed a fairy's heart pounding under that fur, then good riddance. Good riddance for after all their kind had done to us. I wouldn't risk this one later creeping into our village to slaughter and maim and torment. Let him die here and now. I'd be glad to end him. The wolf crept closer, and the twig snapped beneath one of his paws, one bigger than my hand. The doe went rigid. She glanced to either side, straining toward the gray sky. With the wolf's downwind position, she couldn't see or smell him. His head lowered, and his massive silver body, so perfectly blended into the snow and shadows, sank onto its haunches. The doe was still staring in the wrong direction. I glanced from the doe to the wolf and back again. At least he was alone. At least I'd been spared that much. But if the wolf scared the doe off, I was left with nothing but a starving, oversized wolf, and possibly a fairy, looking for the next best meal. And if he killed her, destroying my precious amount of hide and fat, if I judged wrongly, my life wasn't the only one that would be lost. But my life... Couldn't you eat wolves, technically? They are meat. I mean, if you're starving. Even if they're starving. I mean, it's not as nice as venison, I'd imagine. Not that I've had venison. To be a little weird as a reindeer. Wink, wink. But my life had been reduced to nothing but risks these past 8 years that I'd been hunting in the woods. And I'd pick correctly most of the time. Most of the time. The wolf shot from the brush in a flash of gray and white and black, his yellow fangs gleaming. He was even more gargantuan out in the open, a marvel of muscle and speed and brute strength. The doe didn't stand a chance. I fired the ash arrow before he destroyed much else of her. The arrow found its mark in his side, and I could have sworn the ground itself shuddered. He barked in pain, releasing the doe's neck as his own blood sprayed the snow, so ruby bright. He whirled towards me, those yellow eyes wide, hackles raised. His low growl reverberated in the empty pit of my stomach, and I surged to my feet, snow churning around me, another arrow drawn. But the wolf merely looked at me, his maw stained with blood, my ash arrow protruding so vulgarly. Wow. Vulgarly. I can't English. Vulgarly? Vulgar. Lee. Vulgarly. Nope. Vulgari? I know how to say this word. Why is it not coming out of my mouth right? Okay. We're moving on. From his side. The snow began falling again. He looked, and with a sort of awareness and surprise that made me fire the second arrow, just in case the intelligence was that of a mortal, wicked sort. He didn't try to dodge the arrow as it went clean through his wide yellow eye. He collapsed to the ground. Color and darkness whirled. Eddying? My vision? I've never seen that word before. Mixing with the snow. His legs were twisting as a sort of line sliced through the wind. Impossible. He should be dead, not dying. The arrow was through his eye, almost to the goose fletchling. But wolf or fairy, it didn't matter. Not with the ash arrow barreled in his side. He'd be dead soon enough. Still, my hand shook as I brushed off the snow and edged closer, still keeping a good distance. Blood gushed from the wounds I'd given him, straining the snow crimson. He pawed the ground, his breathing already slowing. Was he in much pain, or was his whimper just his attempt to shove away death? I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The snow swirled around us. I stared at him until that coat of charcoal and obsidian and ivory ceased rising and falling. Wolf. Definitely just a wolf, despite his size. The tightness in my chest eased, and I loosed a sigh, my breath clouding in front of me. At least the ash era had proven itself to be lethal, regardless of who or what it took down. A rapid examination of the doe told me that I could carry only one animal, and even that would be a struggle. But it was a shame to leave the wolf, though it wasted precious minutes during which any predator could smell the fresh blood. I skinned him and cleaned my arrows as best as I could. If anything, it warmed my hands. I wrapped the bloody side of his pelt around the doe's death wound before I hoisted her across my shoulders. It was several miles back to our cottage, and I didn't need a trail of blood leading every animal with fangs and claws straight to me. Grunting against the weight, I grasped the legs of the deer and spared a final glance at the steaming carcass of the wolf. His remaining gold eye now stared at the snow-heavy sky, and for a moment I wished it had been me to feel remorse. I wish I had it in me to feel remorse for the dead thing. But this was the forest, and it was winter. Well, that was the chapter. I'm pretty sure. Let me double check. Yep, that's chapter 2. Okay. Chapter 1? Wow. I guess instead of waiting till the end, I kind of gave my thoughts as I was reading. It seems interesting. From witchy readings and studies, because I'm a pagan, I don't think the Fae are all evil. They're just not people you should mess with. But apparently, we're going with the mentality, at least right now, for humans, that the Fae think they're evil. You just really shouldn't disrespect the Fae. So I'm hoping and kind of praying that this book isn't too disrespectful of the Fae. Okay. With that, I will talk to you all later. And if you like this, we can continue reading together.